keeping connections and relationships, your many relationships with your spouse or partner, with your family, with your extended family, with your workers, whatever form of relationship. That's what we're going to focus on today and answer your questions, because we're spending time in unusual situations, prolonged periods of time with people perhaps we're not used to spending so much time with. What does it do to our relationships, and how do we navigate this time? Our guest for the next 4 hours for your questions is Natasha Sharma, and she's a total authority on relationships and the psychology of relationships, parenting, motivation. She's also the creator of the Kindness Journal, and we can all use a whole lot of kindness right now. She's with me this morning from Toronto, and great to see you. Thank you for being our guest today and staying with us for these 4 hours.
Thank you for having me.
Every time I think of coronavirus, I think of the book. We're sort of living this modern adaptation of Love in the Time of Cholera. It's Love in the Time of coronavirus. And I want to spend a little bit of time with you just sort of generally setting up our conversation for this morning. I suspect that this could bring out the best in a relationship and the worst in a relationship. What are we looking at right now?
I think right now, at this moment, most people are still adjusting. They're still in a state of semi-shock and transition, and I don't think there's a full adaptation yet to what really is happening. So I think we're still in, I wonder if I could make an analogy to a relationship where, a weird analogy, we're in sort of what would be the equivalent of a honeymoon phase of this, although if you could come up with a different word for it. But the early stages of our relationship with our new normal, which doesn't have an endpoint at this time. So I think in that sense, people are probably not managing it too badly. I'm going to guess, I'm going to wager, but we're not designed to be this way long term, obviously. So I think what will be interesting, and of course the real test for our emotional fitness as well as our personal growth and development, is how we manage this in the weeks to come, because it is going to be weeks to come.
Yes, you're right. And the end not in sight, weeks and months to come. All right, let's focus on, the marital relationship or the long-term partner relationship, because, and I hate to begin our conversation on a downer, but in China during the lockdown, they noticed divorce rates went up. I know I've been reading comments from divorce lawyers who are expecting divorce rates here in North America to go up because of this prolonged time together in couples who maybe, you mentioned honeymoon, maybe marriage, maybe it's not a marriage made in heaven, but they've made it work. And now everything is changed because of all of this time together, exposing perhaps the weaknesses that were there, but they were able to deal with. So why don't we start there with managing that?
I think it's only natural. Again, by nature, we're not designed to be in a relationship with anything or any person for such a long, intense period of time, intense frequency of time. So I think if we start with that realization and that awareness and understanding and just acknowledging that fact to ourselves, that's a very good starting point for trying to manage the reality of the situation that we're all in. Sometimes, believe it or not, it's actually can be easier for people who are not alone as a couple and who have children or other members who they're in the household, because those people can act as buffers in some ways. There are different people to interact with. There's some form of variety, at least in the household, and some ability to sort of interact with different people so as not to ingratiate on each other's, on just one person's nerves, if you will, in the house.
So a buffer, that's good. Try to keep a buffer so you don't get on each other's nerves. But can you give us any strategies? Because I would, the little annoyances when you're stuck in the same house and you can barely even go out, those little things can start to build up. How do you avoid overreacting?
Well, I think that now is the time to practice most of the same advice that I'm usually giving to people, but just really sort of taking it up a notch. So really knowing how to walk as far away as you can in the house. Right now, we're still lucky enough to be able, if we're not in total quarantine, self-isolation, if you're not sick, you can actually leave your house for a walk on your own or with other members of your household. Do that. Now is the time to not try and solve every little argument and every little brush up right in the moment. I've never been a believer of what's the old advice? Never go to bed angry.
Never go to bed angry. Yes.
Opposite of that.
Go to bed angry.
Go to bed angry, please. Like solve it in the morning. Like everyone is better. Nobody cares in the morning. Like sometimes when my husband and I go to sleep angry on something, if it happens, like 99% of the times, whatever it is in the morning, we're not even angry about it. Nobody cares. If it's important, you will discuss it in the morning, right? And I think that kind of advice is very important now because we need to be able to do that quickly and probably more often as we sort of enter into a lot of highs and lows right now in relationships. So there's a lot of strong emotions. It's a very emotional time. This is a very uncertain time, a very unprecedented time. So when our emotions are high and sort of not as stable as they were prior to all of this, we're prone to experience those high emotions with our partners and family members as well. So we need to learn to walk away.
Walk away. We're gonna one more question about relationships, and of course we're opening our opportunity, our access to you for all forms of relationships. But on the couples point, so much time together. I mean, should you feel obliged to spend every minute together, or should you make sure that you carve out time, as you said, go as far away in the actual space physically as you can, but you make sure you have time away, even in a closed house or apartment?
Absolutely. Both. I mean, of course, you want to nurture and pay homage to the relationship that you have and definitely talk about things other than coronavirus. Oh, for the love of God. I mean, it's kind of like now I'm finding the struggle is that we usually talk about our kids if we have kids. Now we're struggling not to talk about the news. So definitely spending time together where you're doing more positive types of activities, where you're talking about things that are certainly staying informed, intelligently informed, but also talking about your life, and other aspects of it, and taking that time apart. So I think it's about being very conscious and sort of informally planning out your time so that you have some space away and some space together, and it's conscious.
Christy is not allowing visitors into their home. That's no parents, no siblings, nieces, cousins, no one. Her husband isn't taking this whole coronavirus thing as seriously as she is. He's allowing his family into their home. This makes me furious, Christy writes. We have a new baby and a 2-year-old. Maybe I'm being overprotective, but what should I do?
That's a tough one. I think there's really no way to know, I guess, unless she can't feel certain about the whereabouts of the visitors and how they're quarantining themselves. I think she needs to try to appeal to her husband maybe through, I would suggest you appeal to your husband through some of the news that we're seeing about community spread. As of this week, the community spread is over 50%, which means that they can't track as accurately at all anymore where infections are occurring. And perhaps if he can read some of that and become more informed, she might be able to appeal to him and help him understand, and they can get onto the same page.
Yeah, that's an important point of discussion. All right, another fantastic question, and this is a heartbreaking question, Natasha, from a woman whose husband has mild dementia. She's his primary caregiver, and this is becoming very difficult, she says, for both of them because she can't take a break from the caregiving. The gym where she goes for yoga is closed. Her volunteer location is closed. The bowling league they both attend is canceled, and they're self-isolating, so no visitors to take off the pressure. And she has to be the main conversationalist, etc. He gets very upset, not just about the circumstances, but also about all the negative news about this. The bottom line, she writes, is that an already difficult situation is becoming intolerable. Is there anything you could suggest to help that couple?
Absolutely anything that she can do to create some kind of space and quiet for herself is paramount, because she is so limited with her options. If there's anything that she can do for him or set up for him, whether it's a movie or television or whatever it is that he enjoys, where he can self-occupy to any degree, music, and she can have some quiet time on her own, I would suggest that she maximize that completely, because she's very limited, and that's a very tough one.
That is very tough.
Yes,
I would say, just a reminder to our viewers, this is a woman who wrote and asked to remain anonymous. So we're happy to do that this morning as we put your questions to Natasha Sharma. If you have a delicate situation and you don't wish to be identified at all or by first name only, just let us know and we'll happily adhere to that this morning as we put your relationship questions to our expert today. This is a question from Jennifer, and it's equally heartbreaking in a different way. Jennifer's partner and she recently lost their daughter, she writes to me this morning, Natasha, and that has already happened. And then in this virus, they are still grieving their personal loss. Do you have any advice for grieving parents during this time as the world experiences its own form of grief? As she says, this is a lot to handle.
Oh, yeah. For someone like that, it's very important to be self-aware and monitor your emotional health. So that's a lot. I mean, just without everything going on in the world, the loss of a child is probably one of the most, if not the most, significant sources of stress and pain a human being can experience. So I would encourage her and her family to monitor their mental health and reach out for help. There are virtual counseling services. I wouldn't suggest this on air, but we do offer them in my practice. But there are many practices out there and many professionals who are offering their counseling services virtually. So do explore those options. They are not canceled. They are not closed. They are still available.
I was just, as you were speaking, I was trying to find it online. I think in Ontario, a group of psychiatrists and psychologists have literally launched a massive online mental health counseling service. It is for healthcare workers, but that kind of service, you're quite right, is existing more and more commonly in this time as we continue to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. The question from New Brunswick. This is a really tough situation. I really appreciate the honesty, the candor of our viewers this morning. My girlfriend is home alone and drinking a lot. She's scared, can't work, and is isolating herself more and more every day. How can I help her?
Hi. Oh, gosh. As I think I said earlier, this is a situation that will potentially be instigate a lot of negative behaviors or make them increase. So for this person, it's important to try to gently confront his partner and maybe help her realize that admit that she may be drinking excessively. And again, these types of services for individuals who are struggling in this way are not closed. They're still available, if not in person, virtually. And he and she can explore those options that are available to them so that she can get the kind of support for her issues.
This next question, no easier for you, Natasha, but also just a very difficult situation. If there's any doubt that Canadians are under stress already in this pandemic, it's being reflected so clearly in the questions we're getting. This is a viewer who writes about her son, who's 5 years old, who is autistic, Natasha, and nonverbal. Not only have I lost my full-time job, I've lost out behavioral therapists, behavior analysis, speech pathologist, and his EAs. These people who have helped this mom say create a team and provide the services her son needs. We have no services. We're home all day, all night, trying to maintain a schedule and routine. And she writes, her husband is fortunate enough to be working, but that leaves very long days for her son, her daughter, who is 8, her son is 5, as I said, and herself. How can I help keep him on track throughout this time? So can you talk to not just that question, how can I keep him on track, but I mean also make sure that she herself is protected, her relationship with her daughter is intact. There's a whole lot going on in that family that's so critical right now.
It's so important in a situation like that there's so many pieces to talk about, but I'll try and do it. For her son, I would suggest that she explore some options online. This is a situation with a child with this kind of developmental presentation, to try and find something online that can continue that social development and that social, pro-social and sort of work and development that he needs. So certain that there exists things online that he can engage in that would never fully replace his team, his support team, but at least could sort of fill that gap during this time. And while at the same time finding time somehow for herself and attending to her daughter so that her daughter doesn't feel sort of left out either.
Challenging all around. As you say, thankfully online there are still many resources and places where people can turn, even though so much is shutting down around us. Before I have a couple of great questions to conclude, but just one overarching statement, if I could, Natasha, because self-isolation, quarantine, so much time in confined spaces, that can test any relationship. Can you give basic coping strategy advice?
Breathe. Find ways to calm the body. So as I'd said earlier, that this is a time where your emotions can definitely be veering on a scale of 1 to 10 across the full range, whereas we normally hover around sort of a 6 or 7. So it's really important to try and do things that you can to stay emotionally as calm as possible. Whether that's taking walks, whether that's doing some deep breathing. There are lots of tools online. We have tools online available to do that, but it's important to just kind of keep in check.
That is sound advice no matter what relationship dealing with. I have a couple of questions for you from parents wondering about the relationships with their children. This is from Deb, who lives with an adult son and adult daughter. Deb's son, she writes, is very much like she is, highly sensitive and reactive. So when this began, she started meditating. She says that's given her tools that help deal with her emotions, and certainly heightened emotions at this time. So she'd follow your view on breathe. That's good counsel for her. How does she help him when we are both reacting and she forgets what she's learned in her meditation?
Yeah, you know, I think it's important to be very kind and compassionate with ourselves right now. And we are dealing with an unprecedented situation that nobody has any prior experience in reacting to, very few people, if anybody. And it's very important to not be too hard on ourselves. So if she has a moment where, you know, she doesn't have, we don't have to be Zen all the time. We don't have to be handling this. This is not another thing that we have to sort of tick off the achievement meter. Just be gentle, be kind. Sometimes we'll react in ways that seem really good, and other times we'll maybe lose it a little, and that's okay. Just forgive yourself, collect yourself, go at it again, speak with him again, try to appeal with him again, or try and help, you know, each other to sort of be calm, but be self-compassionate and self-forgiving.
I think you might have a similar answer to another viewer. We've been allowing anonymity this time because some of the questions that we've been fielding today have been very personal and talked about quite intimate facts about family relationships. But this one is someone who lives with her husband and 3 grown sons and feels outnumbered in that situation. She has some health concerns as well, but feeling outnumbered and snapping, she says, at the little things. So how do I deal with, in some ways, pessimism, but also with pressure?
It's hard not to become irritated with each other when we're living in such close quarters and under the circumstances. When you add the layers of uncertainty and people responding in different ways, some people are calmer, some people are more anxious. We're all responding in different ways, and on some level, I think we're all responding in the same way. So I think in situations like that, again, being kind and forgiving of each other, trying to manage your irritation as much as possible, but also trying to understand when people are unnecessarily irritated. Again, backtracking, noticing it, apologizing where necessary, can go a long way, I think, to help relieving the tension in that situation.
Fantastic. A couple of notes for you before I let you go. We were talking earlier about a family that's grieving the loss of a child in this time of sort of collective grieving our daily lives. And we got a note from Hospice Toronto talking about online bereavement and caregiver support. So I would say not just in Toronto, but in direct response to your advice, Natasha, people in that situation can find some help online and then go to resources on the phone, perhaps. And I have some advice. This is for both of us. It came in from Beth in Nova Scotia. a couple who have 10 years experience in living in isolation because they live in pretty much off-grid in extremely rural Nova Scotia. Do you want to know what she says? She says, get chickens. They must have backyard chickens. It's a distraction for them. Some form of a distract, doesn't have to be chickens, but she says, get chickens. Seriously, like who you marry, which is important, I suppose. And yes, carve out space during the day to a different area of the house. So some time, some space, some joy.
And some chickens.
And some chickens. And deep breaths. Natasha, thank you for everything. I really appreciate your sharing your expert experience with us today.
You're so welcome. It's been my pleasure.
In Toronto. And thank you for your questions.